Brian, Alex, you guys can take it away.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first All Reunion virtual event. This is entitled Rice Then and Now, and it's presented by the class of 96. My name is Alex Stero, and I will be one of your co-hosts this evening. During the lead up to our 25th reunion, Brian and I, along with other committee chairs, Amy Schumacher, Jennifer Kelly, and Paul Doyle, organized monthly Zoom calls highlighting the great work done in various fields by our classmates. We had a panel focus on the COVID pandemic, made up of all doctors, a panel highlighting our class's Division I athletes, including, I think, in a mystical sort of way, Jose Cruz Jr., before he was announced as the new baseball. A panel on nonprofit work, a panel on financial planning. It was really a great way for us to reconnect virtually with all our classmates. Had a great time, great attendance, and looking forward to enjoying homecoming week with all of you. Brian?
Thanks, Alex. My name is Brian Hoblet, and I will be your other co-host. We're going to start the night off with presentations from 3 amazing panelists that will provide different perspectives on how Rice has changed over the last 25 years. We will then have a Q&A discussion with all the panelists. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please wait until the designated Q&A portion to do so. You can use the raise your hand on the question in the chat, and our alumni relations staff will gather those questions for us during the Q&A session. After the Q&A, you'll have an optional breakout room session by class year to reconnect and chat about what the panelists discussed tonight. Alex?
Okay, yep. And just to note, as we announced, this is an exclusive event just for alumni celebrating reunion this year, the 5-year intervals. So we kindly ask that you don't take pictures of any presentation as you're all getting special access to this. While each panelist is presenting, please keep yourself to cut out any background noise for the presenters. Shannon mentioned earlier, we are going to record this for future use, but right now there's no release plans, but we have gotten multiple requests when we've done these for copies of the recording and so forth. So please take note of that. Okay. All right, and now to kick off our panel, I'd like to introduce Tamara Siler, Deputy Director of Admissions. Tamara was there when I applied, and she is still there. And at some point, I'll tell you all the love story of how I met my wife as a campus tour guide. She was Love at 98. Tamara knows all about it. But this is Tamara's 29th year in the admissions office at Rice. As Deputy Director, she serves as a thought leader in admission with a special focus on programming related to the recruitment and support of historically excluded student populations. And she's a liaison to programs such as QuestBridge. Tamara is a Pratt alumnus who graduated from Rice in '87 with a BA in history from Brown College. She'll discuss how the composition of the undergraduate class and the admissions process and initiatives have changed over the last 25 years. Tamara was also a speaker in one of our earlier class of 96 Reconnect webinars, along with Eric Heineman, and we thank her again. Really, truly appreciate your time for participating with us tonight. Tamara, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Alex and Brian and the other members of the class of 96. So I started to think about comments, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hope that I get this right. And with as many Zooms I have to do these days, you would think I feel very confident with this, but there's never a dull moment. So anyway, so I started thinking about it. So if you're the class of 96, I actually started when you all started. So I started back at Rice in 1992. And I did not admit your class because I wouldn't have read your applications yet. So, but everybody after that, I could have read your applications. And I also looked back to see, what was the graduating class size for 1996. And I think I looked back at, pulled up some faculty notes, and they granted 674 undergraduate degrees that year, or degree people walked that year. So we're a little bigger than that now. So I didn't go all the way back to 25 years, but you're looking at sort of the trends over, I guess we went back to 2014. I mean, the thing is that we've gone through at least 5 different CRMs since since I started at Rice. So finding data can be a little bit tricky that's accurate and that we feel confident with it. But we started our newest CRM in 2014. If you're not familiar with that customer relation model, management model, and we're on Slate now. And so we can keep really good data now. So I don't know how many applicants would have been back in when you applied, but as you can see, applications have been steadily growing. So, and which is good because we've been trying to grow a class. We had our first growth plan in 2012. We were supposed to grow the class by 30%. And now we've embarked on another growth plan. So if you haven't heard, we're supposed to have by 2025, we're supposed to have 4,800, sorry, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Like undergraduates. And so, we're actually well on our way with that, with this year's class, which came in at about 1,245 students. So think about that. You had 647 graduates in 1996, and we brought in 1,245 new students. But as you can see, Rice has definitely, we were pretty flat for a while. And then all of a sudden we started doing things that kind of impacted our application pool. We'll talk about some of those things, including this record year, which was this past year. And as you can see, other things that have trended up, our yield, and then what has trended down is our acceptance rate. So as of this year and starting last year, in 2019, we hit our lowest mark of only 9% acceptance. And so, I mean, for those of you who have possible children coming through the pipeline, there's still room, but don't fret. So, and then probably one of the most one of the most stunning changes, and one of the changes that, of course, I, as somebody involved in access and inclusion, would be very proud of, is the change in the composition of the class. Whereas when you were students, certainly Caucasian was the majority at Rice. It's been quite a while now that there's a majority in the class. And as you can see, as of this year, 67% of Rice freshmen are students of color, and almost 30% of them would identify as what we would call, well, they're still terming URM. There's also a change in the wave of terms. We're now referring to those students as historically excluded, because we feel it's a different intent on the wording of that students were intentionally sort of not necessarily tracked to schools like Rice, and that, you know, of course, we have to admit that Rice's own policies kept students out of, some students out of being able to participate in the Rice education until the 1960s. And so, but that's pretty remarkable, seeing that we, given our policies changed in the 1960s, that we have become a school that looks like this. And that for 12 years running, we've been #1 in Princeton Review for best race and class interaction. So that says a lot about about our population. Also, 17% of Rice freshmen are Pell eligible. So we've been turning the tide on the economic part of Rice as well. And in terms of international students, now international students were there when you got there, but I believe the international population was hovering about 2%. Now, this incoming class was 13% international. And so what does that mean though? And so as you can tell, also over time, the composition of where they come from has changed pretty significantly. And we're getting students now from countries where we weren't getting any, like Africa. We actually travel to Africa now. So I think the other thing is that we weren't traveling internationally. We only traveled domestically. We only traveled to certain regions. And now we travel extensively across the US and internationally. And because of that, the size of our office has changed. So you may remember an admission office that could fit into Lovett Hall. We can no longer fit into it all. So I found an email back when Eric Heineman was working in our office, and there were 10 people on that email. The last time we met, I believe we have 57 people in the enrollment division alone in total. And in admission, we have 27 territory managers who read applications. That doesn't count also the opportunity to use individuals who are not admission officers to actually read applications as readers that we bring in for the season. I know that I need to hurry up. So here's some other things, testing policies. So we changed our test choice policy and extended it until 2023. So until 2023, when they have the option to submit testing, but they also have the option to submit other tests. When you were there, you probably had an opportunity to apply interim decision. We don't have interim decision anymore. We have early decision, we have regular decision, but we also have our Quest Bridge process, and we have all of these other deadlines that fall in between. And now, just this year, the Visual and Dramatic Arts program has added a portfolio requirement. And so they've gotten really serious about the quality of the students that they're bringing into those opportunities. So a lot of the programs have really taken on a persona that is very different than investment. And the Rice investment has been a huge boon to providing access to Rice. And as you can see, 58% of all incoming first-year students receive grant aid. And one of the biggest things is that 77% of students graduated last year with no debt. And so that's a pretty remarkable transition. And these are some of the things that Rice is known for now. So if you look at it, we made Princeton Review's great lists for happy students, great, I already mentioned race and class interaction, LGBTQ friendly. Now, I don't know, but I know when I was here in the 80s, there was still not necessarily the most welcoming environment for LGBTQ identifying individuals. And now we're number 9 among Princeton Review for LGBTQ friendly schools. And then when you were here, maybe you knew about Vision. So which Vision was our program that we offered for underrepresented students, and that took place in the spring. Well, we started offering a program in the fall. And so this is before the admission process took place. And so this is also, and this year we did it virtually. We had 455 students participate who are all identifying as historically excluded students. And last year we had 588. So we really are getting quite a persona among students of color. And then Rice, the admission office actually has its own marketing team now. Like that's how we've gotten in terms of when you're in admission, maybe we put some brochures. We don't do many brochures anymore. We do everything online. And we have some amazing assets, including our new website, which actually won a National Webby Award for the best college and university mobile site. And then we have our admission blog, which actually I'm featured on right now. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see me in 1983 in Hanson's hair. I'll let you see if you can figure out which one I am in the picture. But this is, we've had to transition to an incredible amount of assets, especially in light of COVID. And we have now new school videos that are featured and that are coming soon that we're working with each of the academic schools. So lots of social media presence. So I'm gonna stop there because I know that there's plenty of other things to discuss, but this is a high-tech operation now. It's like, you may remember a time when it was just about admission. Now it's about enrollment management, and we have to utilize a lot of tools to get there. So I'll pass it on.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Great to see you as well. And really appreciate the feedback or the overview on that. It's changed quite a bit in the last 25 years for sure. So moving on to our next panelist. John Hutchinson is professor of chemistry at Rice University. He first joined the Rice family in 1983 as a faculty member, but has since served as the Dean of Undergraduates, Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, Interim Vice President for Student Affairs, and a Director of Academic Advising. He also has been the resident faculty magister of Brown and Weiss colleges. Couple those experience with a slew of awards, honors, and distinction, and it's clear he has a lot of insight into how Rice has changed in the last 25 years. And I'm going to make you feel old, Dr. Hutchinson, but one of the first classes I attended in the fall of 1992 was Chemistry 101, and was always so impressed with how you're able to teach a class of 300 plus students and still identify and work with each one. It's almost like we're having a personal conversation. And then also John and Paula, and this is also going to make both of you feel old. Back in 1993, were faculty advisors to my first O-Week group. So thank you. It was great to get to know you back then. And tonight, John will specifically focus on discussing the changes in the student experience, including changes in both the educational and co-curricular experiences. John, good to see you, and the floor is yours.
Brian, thank you. I appreciate that introduction. Actually made for a great segue the way I intended to introduce myself about age. So one of the major differences I think has happened in the last 25 years is 25 years ago, I was younger than most of you are now. And you always used to call me old. So now a change though is now I'm actually old, and a lot of people on campus call me young, which I think is kind of interesting. So, but I appreciate that kind of follow Tamara, because I had a feeling that I knew some of the things that she was going to introduce during her presentation as I talk about changes that if you were to get to really immerse yourselves in the Rice campus now, you would immediately notice. And I think each one of these things has associated with it some really good aspects that are real positives, and there's no question that they're positives, but they come along with challenges as well. And I want to talk about those challenges in the experience because they represent things that you probably wouldn't have recognized from your time 25 or other number of years ago. Amongst the things that Tamara pointed out were changes in our student body and in the number of different dimensions in which our student body has become significantly more diverse. And there's no question that that is a very significant positive. I track back far enough that I remember the times when our student, what Tamara referred to as historically excluded groups were pretty much historically excluded, and in which there was not nearly so much acceptance of diversity. Amongst the things that we can celebrate, for example, are the statistics she quoted about the fact that 17% of our matriculating class are Pell eligible. But when we reflect on that, that actually produces some interesting challenges for us because there are increasing expenses associated with being a Rice student. And we have only recently begun to address, through things like the Rice investment, the challenges for low-income students to be able to participate in all of the ways in which the Rice experience is significant. That means making sure that if there are hidden costs associated with being able to, say, participate in a program, including as simple as participating in Beer Bike by having an appropriate t-shirt, that some of those costs actually are not affordable by some of our students, and that we have come to recognize now the importance of making sure that all of our students have access so that all of our students can have that sense of belonging. One of the positives, I will say, I love the graph that Tamara showed about the demographics of our population of students now. But it's also apparent that particularly for those students, again, we'll refer to as historically excluded groups, the experience of those students has not always been the same as those from majority populations. In fact, there are reasons to believe that they have that students from groups that have been historically excluded have much less of a positive experience at Rice than, for example, white students have at Rice. And that's enormously important for us now and has become significantly more visible as we have increased the diversity of our population. And as a consequence, a significant focus of recent time at Rice has been to make sure that every student who comes to Rice has a feeling of belonging at Rice, has a feeling of being included at Rice, has equal opportunity being at Rice, both from financial aspects and from leadership aspects in different programs, that it is important that all students have a positive experience. And one of the great things about having a more diverse population is it makes it possible for us to understand the challenges associated with providing that equality of belonging and to making sure that we have appropriately accommodated it. We have, for example, first opened a multicultural center and the Rice Student Center, and now actually a beautiful, just recently renovated space for a multicultural center in what actually used to be Paula's and my house, old Weiss House, which is now the Multicultural Center on campus, a beautiful new facility. Just launched within the last week was a new program on critical dialogues on diversity, initiated by our new Vice Provost, Alex Bird, and offered to every single student who is in the entering class here at Rice to have conversations about the meaning of identity, about the meaning of diversity and identity, about the meanings of inclusion and acceptance. And this, I think, is an indication of the kinds of responses that Rice has made to the wonderful change that we have made by diversifying our population. Second area that I would like to talk about actually is more programmatic, maybe even sort of co-curricular, but it overlaps into the curriculum. The good news is you would be amazed, if you're not already aware, of the increased opportunities available to our students outside of the classroom. They're always good, but now we've made significant investments to make sure that students have the opportunity to study abroad for a full semester or for immersive programs or programs during the summer to try to internationalize the experiences of our students and to put money behind that to make sure that students are able to afford to do it. We've increased the opportunities for students to be able to access internships. We've formed far more connections between the Rice Medical Center, or the Texas Medical Center and Rice, as well as our corporate partners, to be able to make sure that students have the opportunity to gain crucial internship experience. We've dramatically increased the opportunities for students to do research, both here and across the street. And many of you know of the significant leadership initiatives that we have undertaken over the course of the last decade to give our students the opportunities to develop their leadership skills while they are at Rice. Now, you think all of that sounds positive, but there's a peculiar thing that happened when we did this. We created this with the idea that we wanted to significantly increase the opportunities for our students. We did not anticipate that our students would respond to that by regarding each of those opportunities as an obligation. That is not, I have the chance to do all of these things, but rather I have to do all of these things because I'm in competition with other folks and I need to distinguish myself in some way or another. So I need to be involved in all of these things. Now I'm going to actually share my screen. If I can remember how to do this, and I think this will work. Let's see. I'll share that. Oh, no, that's actually not what you want to see, is it? You probably don't want to see anything, but that's the wrong slide. Let's try this one. Let's see. Am I sharing it yet? Where did the share screen go? Come on back. I've lost it. Oh, here it is. Okay. New share here. Much better. Now you can see it? Now you can see it. Good. I have a producer in the office here with me who's giving me feedback. All right, many of you may have seen this slide before. This is actually a slide that President Lebron produced a while back, talking about the changes in the values that Rice students expressed for what they wanted to do while they were at Rice. And you can see that from his perspective, and there's a lot of evidence to bear this out, in 1985, and I think this was probably still true in 1996, the dominant interest and value that students felt about the Rice education was their classroom experience, and maybe researching and mentoring and leadership and civic engagement and study abroad might fit in there as well. But the president hypothesized, and then later survey data proved out, that our students actually, if you look at the same numbers there, maybe the value drops to like 25% being classroom experience with sort of equal amounts divvied up amongst other priorities that the students may have. And all of that sounds wonderful because it talks about the diversity of things that students might experience while they are here. But one of the things I did, and I did this with President Lebron's permission, was to say, a different way that we might look at this is to put it not as a pie chart, because it's 100% of a pie chart, but make it a bar chart. And so here's the comparison of the values propositions between 1985 and 2005. And you can guess what's going to happen here because I've left a lot of room at the top of the chart. The curriculum has not changed over that period of time. Therefore, the time obligations associated with classroom activity are the same as they were before. So if I scale all of these priorities according to what the priority was placed on classroom activity, we wind up with a graph that looks like this. And what that means is, if we look at that, it's somewhere close to 300% of the time commitment that each of you would have experienced when you were students at Rice, as we place the same priority on classroom education, because the curriculum didn't change, but also pile on top all of these other things. Now, clearly this is impossible. So my own hypothesis is that this last graph is actually a representation of what our students are experiencing. Notice it still comes to over 150% of the amount of time that we would have anticipated a student spend in 1985 or 1996. But notice it also means that there is a decrease in the amount of time that students can spend on any one of these activities, including the curriculum, which hasn't changed, and therefore in principle should require the same amount of time. So now I'm going to drop this back down out of the way so that we can all see each other here a little bit more. One of the things that we have learned about our students, and it has to do with two things, is that our students are actually extremely oriented around performance now, far, far more than our students back in the 1990s were. They are interested in demonstrating their abilities to do things so that they can compete in the marketplace. And there are two driving factors associated with this. One is we are now deeply into the No Child Left Behind generation. The No Child Left Behind students started showing up around 2012 at Rice, and we could tell the difference when they got there. They were used to performing on exams and used to it being the case that the expectation that they would have is that they were here to perform on exams. The second thing that happened was they are also the Great Recession generation. They also came out of a period of time when Rice graduates graduating around 2008, 2009, 2010 had a hard time finding jobs because there was a significant decrease in the availability of jobs. That significantly increased the concern in the competition for employment. As a consequence of both of those things, increasingly, Rice students became concerned with acquiring credentials, with making sure that they were performing at a level that would cause them to compete. And it's at the case now where for most of our students, they will view an A in a class as simply surviving the class and a B as a failure. And that's problematic because it's really difficult for our students' mental health to live in that kind of a competitive environment. One of the concerns that I have, and I've expressed to a lot of people, is relative to our experiences in teaching all of you who graduated back in the 1990s or before. We felt like you understood that the Rice education was just something into itself that was wonderful to acquire. The whole Rice experience was what you wanted out of your time here, as opposed to feeling like once you got to Rice, you just had to keep fighting and just continue on. I mean, I'm hoping that this will turn around. We need to do a good job with our advising. We need a good job with mentoring. We need to get an understanding from medical schools and employers that our students don't need to be competing in this way and that they really do have the abilities remarkably accomplished, and they're burning out. And that's a way in which I think Rice has really begun to evolve. I don't think it's Rice. It's a nationwide phenomena associated with being a college student at this age. And I think at Rice, we are dealing with it better than other universities are because we have good support systems in place. But I also think it's something we need to continue to work on. So those are contrasts that I wanted to draw between the experiences you may have had and the experiences that our current students may have, and what we may be trying to do about those challenges. And with that, I will hand it back off.
Thank you, John. That was great. And now I'd like to introduce our final panelist for tonight's discussion. His name is Georgeristow. He currently serves as our university architect. George earned his Bachelor of Science from the University of Michigan and his Master's in Architecture from Yale University. Prior to joining Rice in 2017 as Assistant Director for Project Management, George practiced architecture for 14 years, primarily in Philadelphia. As university architect, George oversees the planning, design, and preservation of campus buildings and grounds. He is a registered architect and a member of the American Institute of Architects. He will be shedding some light on how the physical environment of Rice University has changed in the last 25 years. George?
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. I had to let my dog in the room because my 6-year-old is practicing violin right now and it's kind of freaking him out. But I guess that's the way things go these days. Wasn't planning for that, but a good evening, everyone. That hopefully that'll only take a few seconds of today's time. Those are two very, very hard acts to follow. So hopefully my presentation will be time well spent. I didn't attend Rice, but I knew the campus quite well. Before joining the administration in 2017, I spent a lot of time on campus between about 2008 and 2012 as a consultant. I thought it'd be a good use of 10 minutes or so in this meeting to kind of look at the built environment and how it's changed since the mid 1990s, and also give a glimpse into the coming years with the projects currently on the boards, as well as the issues we'll be facing in terms of campus planning in the coming years. So I'll go ahead and share screen now. Okay. Guess everybody can see it if I get a thumbs up or anything, but all right, excellent. So we have several major capital projects, building projects, either in design or construction right now, or in the case of the new engineering and sciences building up there at the top left, it's actually in design and construction at the same time because it's moving so quickly. Conversely, the addition to the OEDK building is on pause due to a fundraising gap, but hopefully that'll get going again soon. The new Hanson wing, which replaces a 57 wing of Hanson, will be the first mass timber structure on campus and probably within the 610 loop of Houston. That building's in construction right now. Kennedy Hall, which is an addition to Anderson Hall architecture. I don't know if any architecture grads are on this call, but that building will start construction next summer, along with a new student center, which we now refer to as the Moody Center for Student Life and Opportunity, which will also include a new home for the Multicultural Center, as John noted earlier. Its current home, it will have a new home in the new Moody Center for Student Life. We just started a pre-design and programming study on the new visual arts building this fall and are aiming to complete a new facility at the end of 2023 or 2024. So you see an image from the design competition at the lower right there. So, kind of looks like, when you look at all these projects together, kind of looks like a potpourri of architectural styles and expressions. But when you look closer or in the details, the themes of what makes a Rice building are evident. And I'll talk a little bit more about those identifiers in a minute. And similarly, if you were to put some buildings within a handful of years of 1996 together like this, in the same way, you might have the same initial takeaway. You see a variety in expression and composition, but the common themes are there. So what is it that makes a Rice building a Rice building? You might say that you know it when you see it, but there's more to it than that. My predecessor, Rice's first official campus architect, although Edgar Odell Lovett was kind of the campus architect for a while early on. But my predecessor, who retired last year, spent some time with the Buildings and Grounds Committee several years ago contemplating this question more objectively. And so in those discussions, several identifiers came to the surface worth noting and considering with all of our new projects as we bring different architects, to campus to contribute to the campus fabric. So the identifiers are things found in all buildings going back to the original administration building, now of course known as Lovett Hall. At the top there, you can see diagrammatically how some of our more contemporary designs reference back to the proportioning and the patterning of Lovett. So Lovett kind of starts the whole discourse, and then everything relates back to it some way. In addition to the identifiers there at the lower right or lower left, we have aspirations for all our new projects listed here on the right. I've recently added the ones in the yellow text and discussed these quite recently with our Buildings and Grounds Committee, the group that oversees our architectural consultant selection for all our major capital or major building projects. So things like resilience, porosity, sustainability, and inclusiveness are sort of new aspirations that have been added to the list formally in that sense. We have, of course, built a lot of buildings since 1996, and all the ones that you see here in red did not exist in 1996. Back then, Alice Pratt Brown was a brand new building, and it kind of sat on its own out there on the west end of the main campus. Of course, not completely alone, the stadium's there as well. And I'll leave this up for a few seconds. Every time I look at it, it's kind of mind-blowing. I've also indicated some buildings here that we've removed recently in the kind of richer green color, such as Abercrombie demolished this summer, the Media Center was demolished this summer, and of course, the Hanson 57 wing a little bit more recently. So in many ways, Alice Pratt Brown was kind of a direct nod to the very first master plan for the university, drawn before anything was actually built. This is from 1909. A plan that was very rational, but of course did not anticipate the kind of density, growth, and building types and facilities that would come later. And even in the 1980s, the plans for campus growth were somewhat modest, and they focused on the main quads in the central and eastern portions of campus. It wasn't perhaps until the early 2000s that the planning efforts started shifting more to the west and south, and a long-term vision for the series of buildings weaving gracefully through the Harris Gully watershed and towards the intersection of University and Main started to kind of take shape as an idea. These master planning diagrams I just showed help prepare for some of the issues that are becoming more and more substantial, with a few listed here, kind of in the near and long term: landscape, mobility, parking, the campus perimeter, campus density, and of course climate. So back in the 1990s, we could build buildings and have the first floor more or less level or flush with the surrounding grading, or have some subtle approach. This allowed the landscape to have a kind of consistent flatness that I'm sure many of you were accustomed to or sort of have in your memories of the campus, mostly with St. Augustine and Asian jasmine as ground cover. Things have changed since then, especially since Allison and Harvey, and our new facilities are now required to be raised higher above the floodplain. The first floor level at the new Social Sciences Building, Craft Hall, is about 6 feet above the street adjacent to it, creating a more topographic approach and opportunities for more native plantings that require less irrigation and maintenance. And while density has increased considerably in recent years, the campus relies largely on existing hierarchies of transportation infrastructure, like roads, sidewalks, bus stops. Bicycles and scooters are more prevalent than ever and often share the same paths that cars and pedestrians do, blurring the line between slow paths and fast paths of travel. And when you look at, for instance, the City of Houston's bikeway plan, it's easy to see that if we coordinate with their efforts, we could have we could weave dedicated bikeways through campus, so that commuters going, say, from Southampton to the Med Center don't have to add 2 miles to their journey. This, of course, implies that we rethink the symbolism and aesthetics of the campus perimeter. once a tight and consistent hedge that is less regular these days, often compromised by the sun being stolen away from it by the mature live oak trees. There are some places where you can't even barely see it, so it raises a question of how important it is to continually maintain this element of our landscape, or whether we rethink the purpose of the perimeter boundary and how it might dematerialize or function differently. While the edge of campus is mostly surrounded by its single-family residential buildings or park space, there are a few segments that have very different interface and therefore potential to weave with the destinations beyond the hedge. I think we're going to start to see some of these relationships, or some of these more urban relationships, transform in the coming years. We all know that the campus-built environment is getting more dense. And we've done studies to show how Rice can continue to expand its square footage and even quadruple the square footage, the current square footage, while being mindful of the continuity of landscape and the sensitive areas with regard to maximum building heights, like the center core of campus that you see here. So this is quadrupling the square footage of built space on campus. Density is good, but it can sometimes be at odds with nature and climate. And we need to be mindful of the fact that despite the ongoing work in Brays Bayou, the campus is still currently predominantly within the 500-year floodplain. This means, among many other things, that with every new building we build, we have to account for associated stormwater detention within the campus boundaries. It is important that we leave a significant amount of permeable ground for this. One thing that could help in this regard is moving away from relentless surface parking. Not too long ago, we had a lot of surface parking within a stone's throw of the academic quad, like you can see here. I think this picture is from the old Bonner building, which I never saw, but based on, I think that this is from Melissa Keene's web blog. So that's where I put my money that is taken from. The central garage below McNair Hall, which many of you know, along with a more recent parking structure attached to the Cambridge office building, have started the shift away from the surface parking default, but we have a long way to go. We have to consider that the parking demand is also changing and doesn't necessarily increase proportionately with the increase in campus population. And as long as we can work around the city of Houston's antiquated minimum parking requirements, we have the ability to shape our own approach to parking that is forward-looking. Projects like this one at Washington University in St. Louis showcase how some of our peers in similar campus environments put up more upfront investment into parking solutions that better integrate with density and campus planning efforts. And I'll conclude today by noting that it's not just about building more buildings and keeping up with the increase in enrollment and filling out the available land we have for development. We've removed a few buildings recently, again, such as the ones in dark green, but we also continue to strategically renovate many of the timeless buildings that define the scale and character of the inner core of campus. I've highlighted a few here that could be significantly renovated somewhat soon, of course, looking for donors in some cases, including Lovett Hall. So Lovett, Sewell Hall, Mechanical Engineering Building, George R. Brown Hall, and Alice Pratt Brown Hall are ones that I think we're going to be looking at rather quickly. We've done a lot of studies on some of them, and hopefully we can get those projects moving soon. So I'll leave it with that. That's probably my 10 minutes, but I look forward to some Q&A. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, George. And thank you to all our panelists. This was very informative and very interesting. We've now come to the Q&A portion of the program. Our alumni relations staff have been gathering questions from the chat, but if you'd like to ask a question directly, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So while we're waiting for some questions, I guess my question, George, to you is, I remember when I was at Rice, there was two things that I kept hearing that seems like about architecture. One was the need to increase capacity for parking and to do so underground, and then at the same time to maintain green space. I assume with Harvey and Allison, is underground parking, is that a non-starter now? And then two, as we're going to quadruple our overall office space, is there still going to be the dedication to keeping some of the green space that's out there?
Those are excellent questions. Thank you, Brian. And I'm happy to address some of them. I'll try to be brief, but I think the answer to the first question is it is not a non-starter to put parking below grade. It is a little more difficult. There's more criteria that has to be met, and probably the cost per individual stall, which is always a metric that you measure against, is different than it would have been pre-Harvey or pre-Allison. But I think there's enough in the master planning efforts and previous studies that have been done that have shown the benefits of putting parking below grade. But I think one of the challenges is also knowing, the moving target of knowing exactly what that demand is, and where the most bang for your buck you're going to get on campus to put parking below grade, and to sort of get that investment to work out the best way. But I do hope to see more underground parking take shape in the future. And then your other question about increasing office space and increasing square footage relative to green space. Leaving ample green space is a high priority, and it's almost by necessity, beyond just trying to preserve the campus aesthetic and experience. It's almost necessary just by virtue of stormwater detention requirements. So I think that no matter what we do, it's going to have to be there. But I think we would go above and beyond that anyways. We don't want every piece of green space to just look like a stormwater detention area. We need to recognize the going all the way back to the original master plan, there's a certain kind of harmony. There's a ratio between sort of green space and building that we really need to maintain, especially in the center core of campus.
Okay, great. Shannon, are you collecting any Q&A questions? Invite anyone who wants to ask a question to go ahead and raise your hand.
Yes, you can definitely use the raise your hand. You can also come off mute. We did get 2 in the chat though, so I'll go ahead and start with one of them. What role does admissions play in creating a class that is credential focused versus classroom and knowledge experience focused? It's probably for Tamara.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was very intrigued to hear John's take on things. When we evaluate applicants, we're really evaluating them on 3 different ideas. We're evaluating them on intellectual vitality, impact, and the case for Rice. And so in essence, we are looking for students who hopefully are not driven by competition. And so it's interesting that, because a lot of the students that I recruit really say that one of the things they love about Rice is the fact that the competitive atmosphere is more collaborative. So when we bring in students, they seem to be on that wavelength, but I agree fully with John that I think we still need more with the academic advising. And I think it needs to be more, I think students need to be given permission not to do certain things. And I think there's still that drive to, and that's one of the messages I drive home with my, I think we're bringing in students who are inclined to do that, but I think, there's something about that initial advising that you have to start giving kids permission to do different things. I think what's good is that the programs have started. If you all were engineers here, you probably now have more flexibility than you would have had back in the day, because I do think they've started to think about, the fact a whole bunch of classes into you, that students need to be able to experience the joy of engineering earlier in the process. So I do think that they've started to look at things like that, but we're trying to create a class that is interested in more than just the learning experience, but we do talk a lot about research and all the opportunities that you can do. So maybe there's a way that we can set it up that you're not required to do it all. It's just that, you know, you're telling us that this is what you want to be able to do. Necessarily a requirement that you do all of it. You don't have to. And I'm constantly still talking kids out of the multiple majors. I'm like, that, I mean, because right now still about, I think 40% of students are picking a multiple major. And I always ask them why. I just ask them in the recruitment process, why? You know, is it because you can make yourself just as marketable by like really digging into one area rather than trying to say, I'm going to cover all my bets. So I think it's still I think we're all working. What I will say is I feel like we're all working together. Like we with, the Dean of Undergraduates, we meet with every academic area. We talk about what you'd like to see more of in your students. So we try to take those messages, and then we talk to places like student success initiatives, which is definitely not something that would have been there when you all were students. SSI is really, trying to do that work of dismantling some of that, angst, and really trying to provide a lot of support for students. So we are trying to bring in the right students. I think we do, and we have to figure out, how, and the things that they say they like about Rice are kind of flying in the face of what John said. Is like they don't want to be competitive, but then somehow they're getting there, and they're feeling, and it seems like they're feeling that we told them that they have to do everything, and that's not what we meant when we said these are all the things you can do. You don't have to do them all.
So let me piggyback on that, Tamara, and say, first, I don't think this is an admissions issue at all. I think it's a generational issue about our students. And I agree with you that one of the things that's wonderful about our students is within the Rice community, they are extremely collaborative and cooperative in their learning processes. The competition that they actually feel is with graduates from other universities, particularly in a global economy. They now feel that the job market outside of Rice, as well as even the admissions market for professional education and graduate education, has gotten so intensely competitive that they're always looking for an edge, not against their fellow Rice students, but against other university graduates. I think an interesting example of that, the single greatest protest amongst Rice students in the last decade was when I proposed through the faculty senate that we lower the maximum number of credits that students were allowed to register for from 20 to 18. And our students actually staged a sit-in strike in the faculty senate to protest this change. And the largest argument of it was that if we didn't let them take more courses, they were going to lose their competitive edge against students from other universities. And so I think that's why I say, I think it's a generational thing. I think admissions is doing a great job of bringing in students who are collaborative within our community. I think we have a broader societal issue, as evidenced by the fact that I point the finger at No Child Left Behind and standardized testing. Shannon, what's our next question?
That we have quite a few in the chat, but that same alumni had also had another question where she said words that students my vintage would use to describe Rice students were quirky or misfits from their high schools. Would those words still fit the current student body?
No. Short answer, no. I think that they are fun-loving, but they're definitely not misfits whatsoever. And honestly, I think that was a mislabel for all of my years here. I don't think Rice students are misfits at all. I do think they are interested in finding their intellectual peers. And I think they come to Rice to find those intellectual peers. And they may have struggled to find those peers before they got to Rice.
Yeah, this is Al. So there's a question here, and I'll kind of broaden it. How has Rice's mental Services shifted change since 1996, and maybe I think any of you could enter this. Let's broaden it to student medical services. That was over by Hampton, and now across from the new business school. There's the beautiful rec center and swimming pool, and I heard a rumor a few years ago that Rice kids would get one free massage per year. So I hope some of these, mind and body wellness things been expanded. What are the resources that they have?
So let me take that one if I could, because actually the last decade we changed them a lot while I was dean, because I had a really good staff of people to help develop that. And we also got a really large influx of donor funds to support our enhanced mental health and psychological well-being programs. We now actually have, in addition to the Rice Counseling Center, a relatively longer standing entity and greatly significantly increased and diversified. We actually now have an entire well-being program that didn't exist at all until somewhere around 2013 or so. That actually, interestingly, is staffed not by counselors, but by social workers. One of the things that we identified early on is that many of our students, one, were reluctant to go to a psychologist because there's a stigma, unfortunately, associated with taking care of yourself. But also because many of our students were experiencing areas in which the stress arose out of factors that wouldn't be classically regarded as psychological necessarily, as much as sort of environmental. And giving our students the opportunity to work with social workers to help talk their way through some of the challenges that they were facing. This has been extraordinarily successful new program. In many cases, the social workers may serve as liaisons to get to other services that might include psychologists or psychiatrists or academic advising for that matter. But in a lot of areas here, we've significantly ramped up the availability and access of mental health resources. And what I can tell you is we could continue to grow that the demand amongst college-age students these days for this kind of support, I'm glad they're seeking it out. I wish the stresses were not such that it were so pervasively needed. But one of the messages that Paul and I have always told our students back in both our Weiss and Brown days, as well as during my days as dean, is that we would actually consider it a success if every single student at Rice at least once would go to visit with a well-being counselor or a psychologist as a checkup, as an understanding of the importance of mental health well-being. And I think we've moved a long way in that direction. I think we continue to give our students excellent support, and we actually, our ratings are actually quite good in this area too, if you want to judge us on the basis of national rankings now.
And John, while you're answering, I mean, you may, I don't think I heard your answer. I guess the follow-up was another question about, because I know that Rice has done some really great things in terms of additions of really talking about healthy relationships between students on campus. And because I think there's a question here about intimate partner violence and sexual assault. And I think I remember speaking with you about this when you were still Dean of Undergraduates, and that we did a survey and we didn't like the results. And as a result, that we started to really look at what we could do to help our students to open those conversations, open that support. And so is there, I mean, I know that we've even added a class that students were required to take to help them to navigate these issues.
Tamara, thank you for raising that. I was thinking about it while I was answering, but thinking that's a parallel issue. And so I'm glad to have the door open for that. Many of you followed the significance rise of visibility of problems of sexual assault and sexual misconduct on college campuses that was occurring really in the neighborhood of 2012 to 2015. Significantly increased publicity about the prevalence of sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual misconduct, inappropriate sexual contact, sexual harassment on college campuses. So we joined in a collaboration with Stanford and Chicago to do our own surveys, and we all used the same survey at those schools, and we all found out that we had a problem, just like everybody had a problem. And amongst the problems that we came to understand was certainly the tragedy associated with sexual assault and sexual violence. But on top of that, the absolute preponderance of inappropriate sexual behavior being experienced by Rice students, that it is just completely pervasive. And this was extremely upsetting. And we came to understand that the idea of just doing an hour and a half of, talk during O week about what you can and can't do was not even almost going to address the seriousness of the problem. And we created a course called Critical Thinking and Sexuality. This was created jointly with the Student Association and with the full support and even request from the Student Association. It's a course, again, Critical Thinking and Sexuality, that is taken by every single student who comes to Rice. It's small group seminars, groups of 25, and they talk about expectations, they talk about communication, they talk about relationships, they talk about healthy sexual relationships, they talk about myths about sexual relationships that are pervasive in movies and on television, and certainly in literature and horribly on the internet. And try to demystify these topics so that people have a better sense of what they want and a better sense of what their sexual partner may want, and a better skill set to communicate those expectations between them in an effort to reduce to the maximum extent that we possibly can incidences of sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual misconduct. And I'll say, Rice has gotten a lot of attention for having done this. There was actually one publication that ranked us #1 in the country for universities for feminists. And they cited specifically our Critical Thinking and Sexuality course as a reason why that we were called out. I'll also say the law firm, and as soon as I said that, I forgot their name, Pepper Hamilton out of Philadelphia, the same law firm actually that went to visit Baylor and found them to be a disaster, came to Rice and actually concluded that Rice was more or less the exemplar for how to handle these issues. And they actually have used many of our materials and taken them to other campuses who have sought their help. So this is an area in which we can afford to be extremely proud at Rice.
Fantastic. I know Shannon is gathering some questions, and they keep coming in, so we're going to stick with the questions. Let me ask one of all the panelists. So each of you has to answer. And we haven't talked much about grad programs or grad schools. So when I was working at the information booth in the Student Center, the Baker Institute wasn't up, and the Jones School of Business wasn't up. Obviously, there's been an emphasis there. The school obviously has to blend, I guess, the wants, desires of current students, future student generations, and then alum that donate money for a purpose or want a certain building, and obviously the faculty administration. If each of you had a magic wand and can add one department, one building on campus to meet a need that's unaddressed, what would it be? Let's start with George, and then Tamara and John.
Yeah, that's a great one. So for me, and again, I didn't attend Rice, but I've been part of some conversations in the short time I've been in this role about just the importance of sort of keeping up with the graduate student population and what kind of needs do they have on campus, given that there's no sort of dedicated housing, for example, for graduate students in the same way the college system is set up. So one thing that has always kind of been interesting to me is to think about what to do along Greenbrier. And there's been talk about, you can put some residential west of the stadium, west of where now we call the football bubble is. there's viable sort of land and frontage along there and make a connection to the village. But I think if there was like a mixed use project on the campus side that sort of hugged Greenbrier and included graduate student housing, but also had other amenities sort of at the lower levels and found a way to sort of bridge this connection to the village, I think that would be just fantastic. It just needs a lot of momentum.
Oh, I went in a couple of places.
Tamara, what do you need to get us? Tamara, what do you need to get us to be #1 in U.S. News and World Report?
Well, first of all, I would love to stop the verbal gymnastics of not being able to say that we have housing for all 4 years. I think it's just one of those things that against our highly selective peers, almost every one of our highly selective peers can say they have housing for all 4 years. And so I think it's one of those areas that I understand it's also, we don't know, and it doesn't mean that we need 100% housing. We have to fit that number. We have to have that number, and it doesn't even have to be the colleges. And I know that may be just, that's just like, how could you possibly be saying that? I think Rice needs to own more of its own housing off campus so that when we say kids can't be in the colleges, they're not being, in parents' minds, they're being thrown into the wilds of Houston to fend for themselves. And that but as much real estate as Rice kind of sort of owns and like has access to, and we could have access to more, even just being able to say that even if you're not on campus, you would have access to Rice housing off campus, and that would still be under the purview of Rice. I think that would change a lot. And my other thing was just, we cannot move the needle on Native American students. And I think it's partly because I'm hopeful that the new Student Center might contribute to that, because if you look at all of the other schools who do have significant Native American populations, they have Native American houses. We have to understand what drives certain populations, and that opportunity to come together in community is extremely important to Native American students. And so it's just one of those things that we have not been able to move the needle on that. And we try and we try. I mean, obviously there's still the challenges that they also represent one of the smallest populations of college going students, but it really is one of those areas that we had some momentum. That's one area we lost momentum. When you all were students, we had our NASA, we had students who came together. We had a powwow. We don't have any of that anymore. And we just don't have anyone who wants to take the charge on that one.
So I think I don't know if this is responsive to that question at all, but what I heard was if I could wave a magic and create a program that I think is absent at Rice and that Rice could do well with, I'd create a journalism program, both at the undergraduate and graduate level and with scholarly faculty in the area. I think in the current age of online information and misinformation, driven by commercial interests and fairly corrupt commercial interests, that it's increasingly important that we have access to information which is not driven by commercial interests and not driven by partisan politics, but rather approached from a scholarly perspective. And there's no better place to house that than a university. And we don't have anything in journalism, but I think it's an increasing need. If I could snap my fingers and we created something, I'd create a journalism department here.
That would be awesome, John, because that would be business. We think is already taking care of one of the areas where we had for many years. And so this is our first year with a business major, and journalism would, I don't want to be here if they add one and the numbers of applications increase to that level. I'm too old to be reading that many applications.
Yeah, well, I was hoping that maybe somebody on this particular call was going to hear that and say, I've got about $50 million lying around that I could do something with. here's your chance.
So let me ask a question about student life. And one thing that's changed since 1996 is the joint serveries. And one thing I always loved about Lovett was going in there, seeing professors, you, Dr. Hutchinson, come in and have lunch with us. Has anything been lost going with the joint serveries versus having the college-specific serveries?
Shall I take that one? I think you aimed at one at me, and it's so.
Sure.
I'll say a couple of things. One was family style is completely gone. But I think family style was probably going to go away even if we had not gone to the joint serveries. I think it was not attuned to the lifestyles of students moving forward. Just not the experiences they had before they came here and not the experiences they wanted to have while they were here. It's a loss, but I think it was something we were going to lose. I think that we worked very hard to try to sustain the associates program, the faculty associates and the staff associates or university associates. Tamara is one of the best staff associates on campus, regularly going over to Brown College. Paul and I continue our associations at Weiss and at Brown, but it has been increasingly difficult. And it's kind of an uphill climb to continue that longstanding tradition of faculty going to the colleges and having lunch. We have a real hardcore group that is really good at it, but given the sizes of the faculty, we could have many more faculty engaged. We do have an outstanding and distinguished associates award program to recognize the associates who participate on a regular basis. It's right up there with the other teaching awards in terms of the prestige. So we've invested in it. The real interesting challenge, Brian, is actually going to be, can we come back from COVID? Because for the last year and a half, we prohibited it for good reason that associates go into the colleges. Heck, the students haven't even been able to eat together, let alone with faculty. We're now only in the last few weeks here relaxing that. But the result is that we really have 2 years of students at Rice, freshman and sophomore, who have no experience with this. They've never seen it happen. And therefore they have no expectation that it should happen and feel no sense of loss that it isn't there. And so that's going to take a concerted effort on the part of the university and the faculty in particular to reinvest ourselves to rebuild that, because COVID could conceivably have killed the program if we're not really attentive.
I would echo that. I was with my O-Week group on Sunday in the servery, and they have Sunday dinner every week. And so I went in expecting that it was dinner, so people would be there. We were the only full table of people in the servery. Like literally there was no other kids because they're associates, or there's not this, they don't have any expectations of it. And to now have positions, like I think everybody used to think, oh, being an RA is just so great. You get free housing. And, literally one of the other, I think there were 3 colleges in search of RAs, and one of them had to suspend their RA search because that only, they literally did not have enough people to show up to even find out, like they didn't have enough people 3 people didn't show up. And so it's just, there has to be that. I agree, John. I'm not sure it can come back. I just don't, I think it's the change on the expectations of both sides. The students don't necessarily see it for the benefit as that it could be, because they haven't seen the benefit. And then we also have it from there's so much to do, and it's been so hard to be a faculty member, I guess, or a staff member, and we've been away from campus, and we've been not necessarily connected. So I think maybe that's even changed the perspective, because in my own office, we used to have half of us who are associates on campus. And I think maybe we have a quarter of us who are associates now, maybe it's slightly under that. And so because it was a great way to get to know the students, but the newer generation, they don't necessarily see the value added, especially if their job is demanding.
Let me ask a question. I'm gonna pull in somebody's question here about physical plant, and even as undergraduate population goes up, you now have this virtual tool, right, where you may not be able to break away from it, even if COVID goes to zero. What do you all see the role of virtual instruction or other tools, in a post-COVID scenario, and kind of tying back into some of these loss of traditions? Are the kids on campus more introverted and staying online and in their rooms and not participating? Do you see a risk to that, where they have gotten used to not doing sports or going to games or being around each other? What do things look like? And then how does the physical plant or the technology tools need to adapt to that?
George, I don't know if you want to grab that one as an architect. That seems, yeah.
I don't know. I was kind of thinking, because in terms of the student experience, which I think some of you are more kind of familiar with the pulse of that, but I have been looking at this one question that's very similar from Paul about that's over in the chat, and last year, you could really feel the kind of difference, and I spent a lot, even though I was sort of working virtually, I was on campus at least 2 or 3 times a week for a significant amount of time, and now I'm back. Been full-time for a while now, and but this year is significantly different. And just immediately when classes went back into classrooms, it felt like to me that was what the students wanted. I mean, you're coming to the university for the undergraduate experience, which is a physical thing, right? And I mean, that's part of what even though, like John said, some people don't have they don't have anything other experience to weigh it against, because they've sort of just entered college in this realm. They still have the older siblings, cousins, parents, or whatever, who have told them what that experience tends to be, or what the highlights of it are. And so I think these things like imagining lecture halls going away, I don't think we've really seen the studies kind of produce anything that gives us a crystal ball on that yet. And we're not seeing, like, the buildings we're programming, we're still putting, registrar controlled classrooms into those buildings at the same sort of rate or percentage of allocation that we would with any other facilities previous to this. We are seeing an increase in outdoor space being programmable, which, as the president often says, like, Houston is, for the academic year, you can make an argument that it's a pleasant place to be outside. I mean, the reality, I think, is different for everybody in terms of where your comfort zone is. But you can do your business and teaching and things like that in an outdoor environment and on this campus during the academic year. It's not impossible to do it. So we're seeing that, and just to grab this parking question too. I think I would love to see parking lots go away, and I'm probably not alone in that thinking. But the dynamics are really interesting in terms of not quite knowing where automated vehicles are going, where how far Houston will be behind other cities in terms of phasing out kind of conventional parking. Even just a few years ago, developers that had a piece of land downtown that was surface parking for 30 years. They would put up a 12-story parking garage just to make some money, to kind of like kick the ball down the road to what they could actually do that involves conditioned space. And so it's just it's a little too early to tell, but obviously putting parking below grade kind of helps you keep the land and open space free for speculation.
I'll go ahead and jump in as well, particularly on the question of virtual learning. I mean, I think one of the things that we have not by choice done over the last 2 years is run the experiment to find out the extent to which the residential, in-person, face-to-face interaction with other students and the professor can be replaced with a virtual environment. And I think we have the answer, and the answer is no, that it can't be replaced. That isn't to say that we haven't also learned substantial ways in which online resources, including online videos, can significantly augment the learning experience, but it cannot replace it. I'll just give this as an anecdote. We started this semester, actually, for the first 2 weeks online, and then moved back into the classroom. In my midterm survey, I asked the students, okay, you've experienced this class with this professor, with this subject, in both the online environment and in the classroom environment, which do you prefer? 100% said in person. And certainly from my perspective as an educator, absolutely in person. There's no question that I can relate to the students better. I can understand their difficulties. I can relate to their challenges, that there's a value added to the in-person experience that cannot be replaced. Question about large classrooms. I think what we've actually learned at Rice is the sort of the big amphitheater is probably a dinosaur, which is not to say the big learning environment has to be a dinosaur. That is, if we use those spaces in different ways by creating opportunities for collaboration in the classroom, then we can actually effectively use a large space. While George was speaking, I tried to pull up an image from general chemistry now, which is taught actually now in Brockman 101, which is a big open room with a flat floor. It's not an amphitheater, and movable tables. And we actually group the students, kind of looks like a dining room, actually, with students sitting around dining room tables. And then we give them challenges to work on collectively while the teachers and teaching assistants circulate through the room with students working out the solutions or discussing material that has been presented in class. So I think, no, large classrooms are going to stay, but I think the usage of those classrooms is evolving significantly. But I think the in-person experience is absolutely going to stay. We are not going to go to a virtual university. That's me.
The demand, and from a recruitment vein, that's not the demand. I was one of the few admission staff members who petitioned to actually travel in person, and I went to New York to visit with a few schools who would take me in. And I totally agree with something John said, is that you don't understand what they've gone through until you're immersed in it. Having to come into school, wear a mask all day long while while I'm presenting, I have to wear a mask, and all of what I had to go through. So I came away with a very strong feeling. But even with that, the students want to be in person. They wanted to be with each other. And my O-Week group, they were leaving dinner and they were making plans to have their nails painted. That included everybody in the group. Like, everybody was going to get their nails painted that night. And it's like, so they are hungry to be back with each other. They know, they may not know what the associates program was supposed to be like, but they know what student life was supposed to be like. And they know that they were supposed to be together, and they want to be together. And so that has not changed whatsoever. I saw a couple of questions. I don't want to necessarily take us away if people want to keep on this topic, but one thing is, one question I saw was the difference between the domestic and the international recruiting experience. And actually, it's a lot closer than it used to be. Why? Because we actually have some need-based assistance for international students that we didn't have. And that also is why the population got diversified. It's not as robust as just, you can't utilize federal dollars, but we do have some generous alumni who came together, and that was one of the areas they wanted to affect. And so they actually created some need-based aid for international students. And so, so in terms of the processes, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that the process doesn't look different for a domestic versus an international student. they still are applying with the same applications. They're applying in the same, and we don't have, the two requirements that we have for international students, obviously, we have to have some proof of English, their English proficiency. So if they haven't been taught in 2 years in an English curriculum, then they do have to take the TOEFL, or they have to take some test of English as a foreign language. And they have to, for the most part, be able to show 1 year of support for the Rice education, or else they have to go into the pool where they'd be looked at as one of our needy internationals. But that's really the differences in the process. And so we've done, and the same thing, like when you all were there, probably there was different requirements for homeschooled students. We don't have separate requirements for students. They're meeting the same requirements across the board. It's really only the difference is like the English requirement and the financial requirement. But you know, it's much more equitable in terms of how we review students and what context we review them in.
Thank you, Tamara. Shannon, did you receive any other questions, or does anybody have any questions right now that they haven't put in the chat?
Well, I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. And there was a question about the political ideology of the student body. And there seems to be some, you know, a difference between a survey of 250 Rice students and then niche. But I mean, we just were talking about this the other day with a student panel, and you know, hearing from a student anecdotally, I mean, she would lean more towards the niche perspective, in that, you know, there is a presence of, you know, conservatism on campus as much as there's a presence of progressiveness on campus. Maybe it's more of those who are college going these days are actually going to lean more in that progressive liberal mode. Somehow we've been fighting this with college admission. There is this perception that colleges of our ilk are basically, you know, liberal bastions, and students are making the choice not to come. Not that we are doing anything. We don't ask anyone about their political ideology or anything like that. And when I go to New York, I hear from conservatives, just like, you know, sometimes I'll be like, I'm in New York, I'm gonna see like all these liberal students, and they'll say, I'm interested in Rice because you do have a mixed student body. So I don't know, for those of you who have experienced, John and you, George, if y'all have a different perspective, but I don't feel that, I feel like there's room for everybody's opinions. I think that, you know, when I look at the activity of the Baker Institute Student Forum, I don't get a sense that that is an overwhelmingly, you know, just no, crushingly progressive group. But John or George, do you have any other input on that?
My answer would be, and this actually goes back all the way into the 90s and the time period that many of our audience here were participants of, that Rice students, by and large, are actually extremely reluctant to discuss political issues in pretty much any environment. I think they don't want to wade into those waters. They don't want to create divisions. I think they are sensitive to the possibilities that other people might be offended by their own opinions, or that they might offend people who hold different opinions. It's a source of frustration for me and for Paula, and has been for a long time, that our students need to be able to have productive and civil conversations with people with whom they disagree. But it's kind of been the character of Rice students for a long time that it's easier just to avoid the conversations altogether.
Yeah, and I don't have much perspective on it. I mean, I've been part of the community, the Rice community, for about 4 years, and I guess I've always just felt like, you know, it's kind of this great intellectual environment that happens to be in Texas, and I've wondered sometimes about, you know, how that plays into recruiting when you're, you know, recruiting outside of Texas, and whether, you know, how much it comes up in conversations with students. But I think you've shed some light on it today, and I don't have much else to share beyond that.
Fantastic, great answer. Just kind of scanning here, Shannon, unless you got anything else coming in, and we're right at 8:30, which.
Yeah, I think we got to all of the questions. And I do want to be mindful of our panelists' time and you all and all your time, because we are at that 8:30 mark. I do just want to say a huge thank you to our three panelists, Tamara, John, George, our fabulous co-hosts, Brian and Alex, and the rest of the class of 1996 co-chairs for this great event idea, and for all the hard work that they put into making this happen. Cheers to 25 years. Congrats. And for the rest of our reunion alumni that are joining us, cheers to your milestone reunion as well. I hope to see some of you guys on Friday at our various reunion events. If not, swing by Huff House when you're back on campus. Don't forget to check out our Altogether websites, altogether.rice.edu. It has more virtual events and in-person events there. And I think that's it. Alex, Brian, y'all have anything else you want to say? Panelists?
No, thanks on behalf of everybody. We see Jen Kelly, who's one of our co-chairs. She snuck in there. She's way out in Oregon, and some other classmates. So really appreciate everybody joining and your interest. I thought this was a fantastic discussion. Learned a ton. Maybe this week I will answer my other question. Did Baker 13 happen the last couple of years? Leave that for another discussion. Brian?
I'd echo the thanks to George and John and Tamara. Thank you so much. This was an awesome event. And thanks to everyone else for joining, and hope to see as many people as possible on Friday.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you so much. This
Thank
was
you.
great.
Go Owls.